basically, in this session, we're going to explore a simple but profound concept that everything in the world is connected with everything else. And what's more, that frequently those connections are more important even than the things themselves. So we'll take a look at what that actually means and what it implies for how each of us might actually live our lives. So this idea that everything is connected, it might seem self-evident proposition to some, but for most people who've grown up in our dominant culture, it's actually a radically new idea. In fact, our mainstream culture is based really on a worldview of separation. We're told that our minds are separate from our bodies. We're defined by our individuality. We're separate from each other, separate from the natural world. And today, we'll be looking at ways to integrate different domains of experience that are usually considered separate, like mind and body, science and traditional wisdom, the material and the spiritual, inner subjectivity and social and political engagement. And we're going to show how much of what we find meaningful in our lives emerges as a result of their integration. So this is hopefully going to be a mind-expanding experience for you, but we're going to have some fun too. And because living according to a worldview of connectedness really means connecting with others. And we'll have some interactive time over the next 90 minutes with breakout rooms, and later on we'll have a discussion with the entire group. But let me begin with actually a little background about myself. I want you to know really about who I am a bit, because I think it helps to ground our journey together. Because just like most people, I spent most of my life really believing in the worldview of separation that underlies our dominant culture. In fact, I lived my life according to it. In the early part of my life, I pursued a career in business. With an MBA in hand, I started an internet company, and I took it public during the first internet.com era. But then my wife at the time developed early symptoms of a serious illness that would actually eventually lead to her untimely death. I left my role as CEO of the company to care for her full time, but the company wasn't yet really firmly established. And within a couple of years, it had become like another casualty of the dot-com bust. So with my wife suffering cognitive decline from her illness, I found myself isolated. I had no companionship, friends. I'd lost the prestige of success. Now, at that time, I made a solemn promise to myself that whatever path I chose for the rest of my life would be one that was truly meaningful. But where did meaning arise? I was determined not to take someone else's word for it. So I began my own deep investigation into the sources of meaning. I was looking for something that my rational brain could fully endorse, but that also felt meaningful to the rest of me. And I explored different cultures and wisdom traditions through history, indigenous knowledge, Buddhism, Taoism, other traditional Chinese thoughts, and different fields of science like evolutionary biology and anthropology, cognitive science, neuroscience. Now, when I began that scientific research, I kept coming across this modern worldview of reductionism, right? Like all reality, I was told, is nothing but the mechanical motion of like particles, acting predictably on each other. I came across Richard Dawkins and the selfish gene, and found him saying that actually life is just bytes and bytes and bytes of digital information. And even like there's the famous Nobel laureate Francis Crick, one of the co-discoverers of the DNA molecule, and he began a book about consciousness with these words. He said, "You, your joys and your sorrows, your memories and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules." Well, so if everything can be reduced to this kind of sequence of like zillions of particles hitting each other, well, then it seemed like life had no intrinsic value or purpose. We're just tiny cogs, right, in a vast machine. Sounds grim, the reductionists respond, well, sorry, but that's just the way it is. Wouldn't you prefer at least to know the truth? And one of them, like a Nobel Prize-winning physicist called Steven Weinberg, one of the great kind of spokespersons for reductionist thinking. He put it this way. He said, we must not sink into nihilism or stifle our emotions. At our best, we live on a knife edge between wishful thinking on one hand and on the other, despair. Oh. Well, speaking for myself, I wouldn't want to live my life based on an illusion. And so I sort of felt, well, if my only option were to live on that knife edge, then so be it. But then I began to discover complexity science and systems thinking and systems biology and chaos theory and all these discussions of self-organization and complex systems. And I realized that this whole array of science didn't reject those reductionists, but they added a whole new layer of understanding on top of them. And then I came across this one complexity research, one of the leading in the field, is that at the, his name is Stuart Kauffman. And he writes books with names like At Home in the Universe, The Search for Laws of Self-Organization and Complexity. And so at one point in his book, I came across these words. He wrote, what is the weave? No one yet knows, but the tapestry has an overall design, a woven cadence and rhythm that reflect underlying law, principles of self-organization. And then he says, we enter new territory. We're seeking a new conceptual framework that does not yet exist. But what I had discovered through other reading I'd been doing, that actually it's not quite true that a conceptual framework doesn't yet exist. Because I'd been reading about lots of earlier cultures from all around the world. And I'd come across this period in China known as the Song Dynasty. It's about 1,000 years ago, where the leading scholars and sages synthesized the greatest insights of three different great traditions, Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism. They called themselves the School of the Tao, but we know them nowadays as the School of Neo-Confucianism. Now, these Neo-Confucianists spent many years, generations, developing a systematic and comprehensive theory of the universe that incorporated insights from each of those three different earlier traditions. And the way they described it, the entire universe comprises qi, which we can translate in today's words as energy and or matter, the stuff of the universe. And equally importantly, li, the principles by which the qi is organized. And that essentially is what Stuart Kauffman was calling the principles of self-organization. So the li, they explained, the li are the patterns of the universe. They're the complex ways in which the qi manifests in the real world. So here is a conceptual framework of organizing principles developed over 1,000 years ago by the leading minds of some of the greatest of the world's traditions. So, and now for me talking right now, let's take a little bit more of a look at these li, these patterns of the universe. I'm going to share my screen and share a video with you. Just want to get it to the beginning first, though. So hold on 1 second while I do that. And view screen. And now I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully this will work. Okay, this is...
The study of patterns in nature is not something that is very familiar in the West. But in ancient China, this science was known as Li. Li reflects the dynamic order and pattern in nature. But it is not pattern thought of as something static, frozen, or unchanging, like a mosaic. It is dynamic pattern as embodied in all living things. The arteries of leaves, the markings of the tortoise and the vein patterns on rocks are all expressions of nature's secret language in art. The labyrinth is one of many Li patterns. It is found in coral structures, mushrooms like the morel, cabbages, and in the human brain. The cellular pattern is another common form in nature. There are a myriad of different cellular structures, but all have a similar orderliness defined by their purpose and function. It is easy to be mesmerized with the constant play of forms. But what is most interesting is that certain archetypal forms seem to be woven into the fabric of nature at all. The branching pattern is another Li pattern, or archetypal pattern, that is observable at all levels and all fractal scales. Take, for example, this incredible image of a supercomputer simulation known as the Millennium Run, showing the distribution of dark matter in the local universe. It was created by the Max Planck Society in Germany. Dark matter is essentially what we previously thought of as empty space. It is like an invisible nervous system that runs throughout the universe. The universe is literally like a giant brain. It is constantly thinking, using a type of dark or hidden energy that science is only starting to understand. Through this immense network, unfathomable energy moves, providing the momentum for the expansion and growth of the universe.
Amazing, huh? So really then we can think of Li as like the ever-moving, ever-present set of patterns that really flow through everything in nature and in all our perceptions of the world, like including our own consciousness. And the Li were what the Neo-Confucians felt we needed to understand. And they saw like the aggregation of all the Li in the universe is making up the Tao, what they call the Tao, the way of nature. You know, one sage said, there is Li in everything, and one must investigate Li to the utmost. They had a name for this investigation. They called it Go Wu, which kind of translates as like the investigation of things. And we can think of Liology as like a modern version of Go Wu, incorporating all the different patterns of connection into an integrated whole. So it doesn't reject reductionist science at all, but weaves it together with the organizing principles that arise from complexity science and systems research and teachings from different wisdom traditions and our own internal experience and deeply felt intuition. And Go Wu wasn't just an intellectual exercise. You know, in contrast to the European tradition, the Chinese saw no essential distinction between like reason and emotion. And so their investigation into the Li was embodied. So similarly, Liology is both intellectual and embodied. It's material and spiritual. Now, when the Chinese did their embodied investigation, the Neo-Confucians and others, they had a rich tradition to turn to. And one element within this tradition was known as Qigong, which is a general term that kind of means the skillful management of Qi, right? Of like we're looking back for the matter energy within you, within life. And the practice of Qigong was designed to cultivate one's internal energy and physical systems. So a practitioner could become conscious of their inner energy flows and gradually strengthen the pathways between conscious attention and those parts of our deeper animate knowing that normally remain below the level of awareness. And as you learn to attune with the ebbs and flows of the energy systems within you, your lived experience can become more integrated. So let's turn to some Qigong right now. I'm going to take you through a few minutes just to give you just to touch on an introduction to what this kind of practice is actually like. So I'm going to stand up actually and take you through some simple movements, and you can follow along if you'd like sitting, but I invite you, if you're able to take a moment to stand, if you can, and follow along with me and just kind of mirror what I'm doing and feel into what I'm describing. Okay, so let me start off by moving my chair out of the way. And I'm going to move the screen up a little bit so you can get to see, I want you to see my full body up to my head. So there, I think you can see me there. And to begin with, as we settle in, and you can also do this if you're still sitting too, but if you're standing, to really find yourselves rooted on the ground. Let your feet feel like they're really connected with the earth. And then feel yourself coming to a kind of a center. You can just sort of actually wave yourself just forward just slightly and back just slightly until you feel yourself really grounded in your center. And then allow your head to sort of rise a little bit, as if you're a plant or a tree and rooted in the earth, but reaching out with your top to the heavens. And then allow your arms to just kind of settle. And sometimes people like to leave a little bit of space under the arms, as if you could fit a ping pong ball in there or something. And just let them, don't try to hold them up, but allow them to settle, to feel your body kind of relaxing. And this, oftentimes people will actually meditate in this position. It's called Wu Ji, which basically means like no limits. And you can do amazingly powerful standing meditations in this position. But we're going to start from this position with what's called radiant body breathing, where we're going to open our arms. And you can follow along with me if you'd like. Just open our arms. And as we put them up, breathe in. And then very gradually let the hands move down with the palms facing the body. Get into a rhythm doing this a few times. And the important thing is here, we're not stretching. Oftentimes we're used to doing yoga where we stretch. Here we're allowing everything to be like roughly about sort of 70% of what's possible in our body's reach or whatever, but just a gentle and flowing movement. A lot of it is about the flowing. And so let's do one more of these. Breathe up and feel into what it feels like in your body as you're doing that. Let your hands, and this time as your hands come down, let them settle around with their palms facing the belly, which is often known in the Qigong tradition as the hara, which is viewed as the sort of part of the body. This part of the body is almost like the battery of the body, where energy tends to reside. And so we can actually view that as our sort of core, if you will, of the energy system of the body. And there's a practice is known as three centers breathing. And the first center is this hara. And what we can do is like breathe in. As we breathe in, let the arms expand a little bit, as if we're breathing into the hara. So go. And become very aware, let our attention become very aware of our belly, that core energy center of the body. And then we can raise our palms up to the heart area and let the palms, again, just kind of be, imagine if they were radiating energy. They're radiating energy to the heart and reflecting the heart's energy. And then we can do a few breaths from the heart. So breathe in and just focus the attention on the heart as you breathe in and breathe out, all very gentle, gentle flowing gestures. And then we can move up to the head center, which in Chinese tradition is kind of what connects humans with the heavens. And then we can open up and breathe into the head center and let the palms expand and feel the energy fill that head center with its energy. And then let our hands sink down again, back to that Wu Ji position. And one of the key teachings in Chinese thought is sort of different from the West, that each one of those centers is part of the integrated whole. One is not better than the other. One is not like the true core of anything, but it's the ways in which they integrate with each other that allows us to be a full integrated human being. And I'll take you through one more practice that's described, often called something like differentiating heaven and earth, because the Chinese view of the human being is basically a part of life that actually is in between heaven and earth, that here's earth below and here's heavens above. And as humans, we have the ability to actually be connected with both of those parts of creation. And so this way of differentiating heaven and earth starts with our hands going up to our sort of middle position and just being focused, really noticing each other as if there's an energy source that we're reflecting there with both of our hands. Then we move them out more, bring them back. Sometimes you can almost feel like a magnetic resonance between the two palms of the hands. And then with my left hand, I'm pushing up, and with my right hand, I'm pushing down. And I stay like that for a few moments, for a few breaths. As I'm standing there, I'm feeling into like how one palm is in touch with the heavens. The other one is grounded with the earth. And here is my being in between. So to feel into that, then I'll let those hands go back to that middle position again, and then open up. And then we go closer together. And then the other hand now pushes up to the heavens, and the other hand pushes down to the earth. Again, like you can feel into those energies. And sometimes there's almost a feeling as if by connecting with those energies, the energy flows through the body. Sometimes the body itself can feel quite energized from that. And then come back together. And let's just do that one more time in each direction. So the first, just like we did the first time, for me, it's my left hand going up, right hand going down. And then like this, back to there. And now the other hand go up. Feel into what that feels like. And then back down. And then let the hands sink down to that Wu Ji position. And then just to finish this very brief introduction to Qigong session, I'm going to do what's called an integrating breath. And with this breath, again, we put our hands up gently above our heads. And this time the palms facing the earth. and then let them come down slowly, resolutely, almost as if you're sort of go a French press with the coffee, where you're integrating all that energy back through the body. Let's do that one more time. Or feel that all that energy through the body. And then for our final movement, we'll do this again, but go back to the palms now facing the body itself. Put one palm in front of the other. Feel the palms radiating to the body, and then let them settle on the hara, on the belly. And sometimes it's as if energy gets released in the body, and then the palms can like settle it back in the hara, in that battery of the body. And then we can just put our feet together. And what I like to do when we close is just put our hands together and give maybe a little bow to each other to thank each other for being part of that session together. So that was lovely to do that. And I'll come back to the main, come back to our sitting positions again. So that just gives you a little feeling for Qigong and how that can be an embodied way of connecting with ourselves and with the universe. When I discovered Qigong some years back, it just felt to me like I was coming home. I mean, I just couldn't believe what it allowed me to feel in terms of my connection with my body. And I've become an avid Qigong practitioner since then, and have actually been trained to teach Qigong. It's a real crucial part of my life. So it's just one example of one of the things we can learn from traditional approaches to our like inner connectedness. Now, even though they don't use the term Li, just like the Neo-Confucianist system scientists of different kinds generally agree that these connections between things are actually more important in many ways than the things themselves, which is just kind of a strange concept to get our heads around when we come from the dominant Western way of looking at things. But so I'm just going to show you one example of that. I've got right here, it's a candle flame. So here's a candle flame. Now, if you look at that flame, it looks like something that's kind of stable, right? I mean, from one moment to the next, you look at this flame and it's still there. But every molecule in that flame keeps changing, right? All the actual molecules themselves, 1 second later, they're gone, they're in the air, and new molecules arise in, because the flame actually is the emergent result of a resilient set of connections between a certain stable system, the oxygen, the heat of the flame, the wick, the wax. They're maintaining this resilient flow, which allows the candle flame to actually look like it's stable, even though all the stuff of it keeps changing. It's the Li that you're actually seeing in that resilience of that candle flame. So I'm going to put that there over there so we can remember that. And there's actually an even more kind of embodied way to feel into the sense of the connections being even more important than the things themselves. And the way to do that is to, I invite you to take a moment and think of a photograph of yourself when you were a little kid. And as you do that, I'm going to share the screen again and share a photograph of myself when I was a little kid. So there it is. Now, when I look at that little boy, I know that was me, right? I've even got the memories to prove it. But basically, there wasn't a single molecule in that little boy that's in me now, right? Almost all the cells in that little boy are different. There are some cells that stay in us through our entire lives, but even those cells continually change the stuff that they're composed of, their components. So that's why I can be virtually sure there's not a single thing in that boy that's in me now, and yet that's me. So what connects me to that little boy? Basically, what it is the Li. It's the patterns in which all that stuff connected up that is actually what is more important than the kind of molecules that little boy's made of. That gives a sense of how we can really get it when system scientists tell us that the relationship between things are actually more important than the things themselves. So, in fact, we see this all through nature. And if I just share some of the slides here, what we see is that as the number of connections increases, we see the emergence of new meaning in things all around us. So just think of the world in general, like when words connect, language emerges. When organisms connect, an ecosystem emerges. When computers connect, the internet emerges. And when neurons connect, consciousness emerges. And, you know, well, I'll come back to that in a moment. What's so fascinating about those relationships is that actual meaning arises when these connections actually happen. So that's why we can kind of see meaning itself as being a function of connectedness. So if we look at what Steven Weinberg, I mentioned earlier, this kind of spokesman for reductionism, said, he made this very famous statement. He said, like, the more the universe seems comprehensible, the more it also seems pointless. But if you understand meaning itself as arising from the actual complex set of interrelations between things, you realize that the way we relate to everything around us is inherently meaningful. And maybe some of you have had some sort of peak experience, if you will, of oneness, and a sense in some moment in your life, or moments in your life, when you just sensed everything is being connected. You realized your separate self is just part of something so much bigger. And we're told in our dominant worldview, if you have that kind of experience, that's great. But of course, it's not science. There's nothing scientifically valid about it. But what I have begun to recognize, and what Leology recognizes, is that actually science validates that recognition of that oneness. And it's not that it's like against science. It's actually a recognition of what science tells us is the reality of the universe. So now let me stop this screen share. And we're going to now do a little bit of an exercise to experience that sense of connectedness for ourselves, kind of do a little bit of go woo actually with each other right now. And the way we're going to do that is to feel into some of the sense of meaning that arises from our connections, basically by experiencing what it means to be kind of connected with each other. So in a moment, we're going to go into breakout groups. And what I'm going to ask you to do is we're going to be in groups of just 2 people. And I'm going to ask you to find 3 unexpected things that you have in common with the other person you're in that breakout group. Might be like sort of places you've lived, or hobbies you have, or favorite movies, or people you know. And if you happen to know the other person who's actually in your breakout group, don't worry about that. It's actually even more kind of fun in a way, because then you need to find 3 new things that connect you with that person that you didn't even know about the other person. And at the end of it, I'm going to ask you to just kind of pause and ask yourself, what does it feel like when you discover those things in common with the other person? And, you know, if you have time at the end, then, you know, share that experience with the other person, what it felt to you when you were noticing those things. So that if we can actually go into breakout rooms now, we'll do breakout rooms of 2 per person. If you find yourself with three of you, that's fine. Don't worry. You know how Zoom is. It's always kind of hard to predict. If you do find yourself just all alone, stay there for just a moment, because we'll try to organize the rooms so that somebody will join you. But if you're kind of stuck there for a few minutes and nothing's happening, come back to the main room and we'll connect you with another group. So you don't want to be stuck alone. So let's do that. And let's allow 10 minutes for these breakout rooms, and then come back together again. Well, welcome back to the main room. And yeah, I hope that felt energizing. And maybe afterwards, when we get to have the general discussion, people can share, the whole group, any experiences they had from that. And basically from that experience, it's a fun thing. We just connected through language, but, and of course on Zoom, it's difficult to do a lot of other more embodied connections. But the thing is that, what about those Li ripples that connect us without language? And in fact, that's a crucial part of the Li. Language is just one very sort of human, sort of conceptualized way of making those connections. But it's hard to visualize these connections that are all around us. And a lot of the time, they're not even visible, but they're there. It's a little bit like, just like the wind. If you look outside the window, you don't know if the wind's blowing, except by seeing how it's affecting the tree branches around you, right? So you have to notice the actual shift that are taking place, which sometimes not so obvious. I'm going to share with you another video, which is just an amazing way of really kind of embodying a sense of what that is. It's a video about an interesting little sub-discipline in science called cymatics. And cymatics refers to the visualization of sound waves. We're used to thinking the sound waves are things that we only pick up through your ears. But this incredible video shows us where we can actually see how these connections are happening all the time in ways that we're not even aware of. So as you're watching this video, it's kind of great fun, but I also invite you to imagine these kind of waves of all kinds of interactions happening through all of our connections with each other. So let me share the screen again right now, and let's do a couple of minutes of cymatics. Whoops. Wrong one. Let's do it.
So cool.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? So I had to stop that, in the middle. It goes on for a while, but it's just such an amazing experience to kind of realize really that we exist in an ocean of Li. And that just like that we just saw there, these ripples, these Li ripples are happening all around us. Everything we do, every action we take, every word we speak creates these Li ripples in the fabric of existence. And each of these Li ripples contains part of our unique identity. We can think of that as our spirit. And we're continually being affected by the Li ripples of those around us, while our Li ripples are affecting them. And so just like the wind, as I mentioned earlier, we may only notice those ripples when we attend to them. And oftentimes we'll never even know their impact, like a sharp word to someone at work, that might be passed on to their family later that evening in the form of some quarrel that we'll never know about, or an unexpected act of generosity to a stranger. Just might shift that person's mood and cause them to act differently to the next person they're about to meet. Those are the kind of ripples we're never even aware of. And that's why values are a central part of this investigation of things, a central part of Liology. And because we recognize that how we engage in the world affects the world. And so let's just take a look at some of these kind of core values of Liology, that we can understand these core concepts in terms of connectedness. So for example, the realization and embrace of connectedness can simply be called love. And the embodied resonance and attunement, the embodied resonance and attunement to our connectedness in each moment, we can understand by the English word harmony. And then crucially, the compassionate expression of our connectedness. Because oftentimes we're not actually recognizing that connectedness, or we're not embodying it even, but we can be expressing that compassionately. And there's a word for that in English, it's called kindness. And then let's just take a moment to look a little bit more closely at that word kindness. The actual word kind derives from the same word as kin, like in Anglo-Saxon. So kindness, we can sort of take that as really meaning acting to someone else as if they're a member of our own family, someone you care about, someone you share a home with. So basically, it means recognizing that ultimately all humans are part of the same family. We all share the same home on this earth. And of course, we can go beyond humans. We can extend that kindness to all life, recognizing we share roughly basically 90% of our DNA with other mammals, and even half of our DNA we share with fruit flies. We all come from the same common origins, and we all share the experience of being alive together on this earth. That's what kindness really recognizes, that we're all kin. So those foundational principles of Liology, love, harmony, and kindness. But then we can ask, how do we apply these values? What's the sort of implications of applying these values? And to understand that, it helps to feel into another aspect of our connectedness, the fractal nature of all self-organized systems, including life itself. So let's just take a look at these kind of fractal patterns. So again, I'm just going to share my screen one more time, if I can find the right one. Here we go. So basically, just looking at fractals, basically, probably most of you are familiar with what fractal actually means. It's a pattern that repeats itself at different scales. It indicates self-organized activity. And we actually see it everywhere in the natural world. So we see it in coastlines. We see it in the patterning of leaves. We see it in the patterns of lightning, the patterns of our lungs and of neurons. Basically, ever since life first emerged on Earth, it's been busy scaling itself up fractally to form the complex, interlinked meshwork of life we're immersed in today. So each self-organized system is basically part of a larger system, which is itself part of an even larger system, from cells to organisms to ecosystems to the entire interconnected web of life on Earth, or of Gaia. It's this vast fractal universe that we live in. And we see there are patterns that are both recognizable and forever unfolding, patterns that are mysterious, beyond human comprehension, yet manifesting a deeply meaningful harmony that permits us with reverence and awe to touch into its unfathomable glory. So I'm going to stop this share again right now. And just give me a moment. I tend to, every time I stop the share, I kind of lose everyone I'm talking to. So just trying to find you again on my computer screen. So the traditional Chinese, as we've seen, had another name for this ultimate fractal containing all the natural patterns of life within it. They called it the Tao. And now I'm going to take you through another video to get a deeper sense of this kind of fractal interconnection that we have with things. And for this video, it's actually it's called a fractal zoom. It looks at fractal patterns that have been mathematically created, and it kind of zooms out. And as you go through this zoom and you zoom out, scale up above scale, out of scale, I'm going to ask you to imagine yourself beginning with a tiny cell in your own body, with its connections always changing, and how that's part of an organ in your body, part of your identity. And then zoom out from yourself to your family, community, region, nation, continent, all of humanity, all of life, and then being part of Earth and Gaia. And then zoom out to the solar system, the Milky Way, the galaxies, of which there's over 200 billion of them. And recognize that each part, no matter how big it might temporarily seem, is always part of something bigger. So that's kind of a conceptualized way of doing it, but let's actually enjoy the experience of zooming out using this video now. Okay. Wow. I tell you, every time I ever see that video, it leaves me with this profound sense of awe. I just can't quite believe it. So in fact, at this moment, I'm going to invite you to join me into just a very brief guided meditation with me, a meditation on our deep interconnectedness. Just take a couple of breaths, breathe in what we just experienced there. And as we enter into this meditation, I invite you to maybe take your two hands and put one on your hara, on your belly, and one on your heart for a few moments. I want to begin with a famous statement from a great Neo-Confucian sage. I think one of the profoundest statements I've ever come across in my life. He said, "Heaven is my father, and earth is my mother, and I, a small child, find myself placed intimately between them. What fills the universe I regard as my body. What directs the universe I regard as my nature. All people are my brothers and sisters. All things are my companions." Let's move our hands, if you choose to, away, or you can keep them there if you want, or just move them wherever feels natural at this point. And close your eyes if you prefer. Just breathe in. Let yourself focus the attention on the breath. And for a moment, be aware of whatever it is that you're hearing beyond my voice, whatever's around you. Be aware of what your skin feels. Whatever feelings are arising within your own body. Whatever emotions might be noticed in your being. And I invite you to welcome each sensation, even difficult ones, if there are difficult ones arising. Welcome each sensation with kindness. Let us welcome each moment as the sacred treasure of our lived experience. Every moment. Each moment is a fractal unfolding of the layers of the universe. And then consider your Li patterns, how your patterns of behavior affect others and how they affect you. Those close to you. Those you relate to in your work. How do your Li ripples affect them? How do theirs affect you? And consider others that you don't even know. People living in areas suffering right now from war and climate breakdown. Refugees forced to leave their homes with nowhere to go in the Ukraine and other places we don't hear about as much, in Somalia, Yemen. And consider the rainforests drying out, burning up, and the creatures of the sea living in coral reefs that are dying from the acidifying ocean. And the animals losing their habitat, also refugees with nowhere to go. How do your Li ripples affect them? Make their plight worse, or might be helping them? All people are my brothers and sisters. All things are my companions. And let's take a couple of more breaths. And if your eyes are closed, I invite you to just very gently open them again. And let's gently come back from that meditation and back into our Zoom shared space together. I'm just going to say a few more words, and I'm going to ask you to join me in a general discussion about everything we experienced today. And obviously, for time constraints, this meditation had to be kept quite short. But of course, there's a lot more that we could go into in those explorations. And I just wanted to say that last part of that meditation I just took you through might have felt uncomfortable for you. It's certainly uncomfortable, painful for me to consider those things that I brought up there. But it leads to a fundamental lesson of our interconnectedness, which is known as fractal flourishing. But once we recognize the interrelatedness of ourselves with other beings, we recognize that our own flourishing is fractally related to the health of the larger world. And similarly, we see that our own actions and even our own inactions have a significant effect on the well-being of those with whom we share this earth, even if we don't see the direct connection. You know, the great humanitarian Albert Schweitzer said, "I am life that wills to live in the midst of life that wills to live." And as he said, as a result, I cannot but have reverence for all that is called life. That is the beginning and foundation of morality. And as humans, when we acknowledge the life within ourselves that we share with all other organisms on earth, we have to then listen to that pain in this present time and just strive to bring life back to health in the face of this destruction. Because right now our civilization is devastating the living earth at a scale we can barely grasp. So we must ask ourselves, each of us, what is life calling on each of us to do as it suffers this devastation? What does it mean to be an integrated, ethical human being in an age when humanity has the power to obliterate life's richness and actually doing just that?
I came across a statement by Marcus Aurelius recently that touched me very deeply. And the statement was, to live the perfect life is to live each day as if it is the last, without frenzy, without apathy, and without pretense. And when I contemplated that, I thought the most difficult part is pretense. Without pretense, how to be real. And then I had a dream. And when I woke up the next morning, I had this insight that life gifts me a day to live. What do I gift back to life in that day? And I've been holding that space in my response to what is happening. Not easy, but what you shared around what we're putting out into that frequency world, into that fractal pattern world, into that interconnected world, provides a very potent and powerful conceptual framework for making meaning of every moment, every relationship possibility. So I thank you for that opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Claudius. And there's another really profound concept, actually, that the Neo-Confucians talk about, that the word is chung, which basically translates as like integrity or authenticity, which, to your thing about avoiding pretense, is like really letting all the different parts kind of resonate like as one whole through the way in which you relate to everything. That's something that's been very meaningful to me. The Fibonacci sequence is just one of like innumerable different types of like fractal patterns. And another sequence is similar to Fibonacci, but not quite, is like the sort of spiraling of in shells and things like that, which is called like I think the golden sequence or whatever, which a lot of different spirals go according to. But then the spirals themselves are just one part of different patterns. There's actually a beautiful little book that got produced some decades back. It's actually called Li, the Patterns in Nature, by somebody. It's like a small book. I'll have to find the link, and maybe we can ask Claudius to share it with everyone who is on this later on. But it's a book that actually delineates something like, I don't know, 50 or 60 different types of patterns, which are all different kinds entirely, like cellular patterns, or and some are branching patterns and some are completely different. And it's fascinating because you just get a sense of the different ways in which nature organizes itself. Mm-hmm. But what I find so interesting is that what physicists have come to recognize, these fractal patterns, they're not just kind of cool and beautiful and amazing. They're actually the ways in which life can optimize the negative entropy of energy in the universe. It's the way in which life has found the most effective way to take the sun's energy and actually take it in maximally, and then relate to the rest of the world in the optimal way. So this has been shown now by physicists to be mathematically the optimal way to relate to the energy of the universe. I look at this whole sort of evolution of human artifice and creation in a book I wrote a few years back called The Patterning Instinct, Cultural History of Humanity's Search for Meaning. And so my sense is, just looking at the cognitive anthropology of it, is that, you know, when humans first evolved as humans, we actually evolved in Africa, but then fairly early on moved throughout Eurasia. And I think that as humans, we had this urge to actually reflect on ourselves, to reflect on the universe. And that's the patterning instinct. And I think in cave paintings, and those amazing paintings of hands on cave walls, especially, you see them all around the world. I think that's like reflects this profound human awe of recognizing our connectivity with the universe and our ability to actually be part of it. And then with pyramids, I see that actually as something different. I see that as relating more than anything to the rise of these big agrarian civilizations, and the rise in many ways of like hierarchical elements. And oftentimes these were massive edifices that were related to that sense of these sort of big hierarchies happening in different civilizations around the world. But, you know, these are just my perceptions. But I do think there are shared patterns, most definitely, of human evolution that we see happening like that around the world. I mean, that's the thing about the Li that to me is so meaningful. Like those little ripples, sometimes they sort of go out and they join other ripples, and before you know it, they become a whole sort of tidal wave of ripples. And so I do feel that that's true. But I also need to say that my own feeling is that we are right now in a civilizational crisis that never before in all of history have we ever been approaching. We are in a crisis where we're literally causing the sixth great extinction of life on Earth. We're living in a century where the coral reefs, the greatest source of abundance of richness in the oceans, will be dead by the second half of the century, virtually dead everywhere around the world. This is done by our human civilization that is doing this damage. And I do feel that life right now, whether we like it or not, is calling us in this generation to really say, where can we push? Where can we go extend beyond the boundaries? Where can we do more? What is life? You know, we're, especially those of us who are fortunate to have the privilege to either live in the global north or live in affluent areas where we do have the ability to do more, because there's so many people on the earth right now who are just struggling just to survive from day to day. What can we do to really try to shift some of these systems? So while I agree with you that every act matters, I do feel like all of us have the responsibility to life to ask ourselves, what can we step up to now in this moment of crisis? So yeah, thank you for raising all that and for for what you said that made me blush there. Called to like come up with measurements of the relative value of things. You know, like insurance companies, you know, try to come up with what is the value of a human life when a disaster happens or whatever. And I think that what we find ourselves with is this notion rather that there is this intrinsic sacredness to all of life. And it gets to be also challenging then when you realize that, well, all of life actually in many cases lives off having to kill other creatures, like in ecosystems, and many animals live by killing others and eating them. And obviously we humans do that in many ways. And if we go back to early hunter-gatherers, if we look at those indigenous values that are so meaningful to me and many people, oftentimes, almost every indigenous group was not vegetarian, but was actually had a balance of killing animals to eat food. But here's the thing. If you look at how they approach that kill, it was fundamentally different in essence from the way we see things like factory farming or the destruction that our modern civilization does. And they recognized that every living being had a spirit. They recognized that inherent sacredness. And they recognized, really, we could put it scientific terms of it, that as part of the ecosystem, their health involves, and other animals have to die in order for them to be healthy. And they didn't see that as wrong, but they would revere that spirit and they would pray to that spirit. And oftentimes when they did kill the animal, they would they'd spend time to actually pray to the spirit of the animal that got released. And maybe in many cultures there's a sense that the animal's blood, then that spirit got shared within them. So there was this respect. So you can even have respect even if you're actually necessarily having to cause the death of something as part of something bigger. It's the way in which we approach the quality, the sanctity of life itself that I think is called for. And in that sense, I think there is something that can't be measured. We can't, it's easy enough, we can sort of come up with certain scales. We can look, for example, at levels of suffering and consciousness. And we can say that, when we know warm-blooded mammals or other animals with consciousness, they suffer. And so we can argue that killing them is different from maybe killing shellfish to eat them, even though they also are sentient beings. So I think each of us has to navigate that in ourselves. I've gone through this myself. I've actually made I really wanted to go vegan because I don't want to actually cause the suffering of other animals. But I find myself ending up stabilizing it, not meat eating, but still eating some fish and shellfish. And I rationalized that, well, there's different layers of suffering that get caused. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm saying each of us needs to look deeply into our own hearts and say, what is right for us in this whole fractal unfolding? So thank you for raising that, Ian. Yeah. Well, I do see that the time is 12:32 by my here in the Pacific. It's so we've passed our sort of 90 minutes. So and I want to kind of keep consistent with our time. So if there is any other burning question anybody has, feel free to ask it right now. But otherwise, maybe I'll turn over to you, Claudius. I think maybe to kind of close our circle today. And thank you all. Personally, for me, to be part of this unfolding that has been very meaningful to me, and I've really gained from. Thank you.
So, Jeremy, before we do that, for those folks who have enjoyed this experience, won't you just give an invitation to your next program that you're actually starting? Is it in April?
Oh, yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, actually, two things. In fact, let me just put the links. One is I would like to invite you all, if you're not already members, to join a network. I'm going to put the link in the chat called the Deep Transformation Network, which is basically, we're talking about deep. Oh, wait a minute. I just sent that to Rexley other than to everybody. By mistake, let me just redo that. Okay, there you go. So this is a network where now hundreds of people are connecting from around the world to just join their sense of what it is to be connected as a global community together, to share the sense of what we need to do to reorient in the world. And it's just a wonderful growing community. So I invite you to join that. But to what Claudius was actually talking about, I'm actually starting in April a 10-week course actually called The Principles and Practices of Deep Transformation. And this is a course where we're going to go into some of these themes that we kind of experienced today and that you saw if you were on the last session last month of themes arising from my book, The Web of Meaning, and the earlier book, The Patterning Instinct, and also to what it means to actually transform our society to what people are calling an ecological civilization, and the possibility and the vision of transforming to a truly life-affirming civilization. So it's a 10-week course. It's online, and there'll be weekly sessions where I'll be in live conversation like this with people on the course, and there'll be places to be in smaller conversations with other people doing the course. There's 2 sessions per week, which will be on video, so you can watch them at your own convenience. And by the end of it, I think you'll really have the kind of tools to really be an agent of deep transformation within our society. So the link is there on the chat. Thank you very much, Claudius, for inviting that.
Thank you. So for those folks who would like to experience Jeremy's presentation that he did a month ago on the Holos website, you'll actually find access to that presentation as you will to this one. And then just to mention that our next event is on the 21st of April, where we will have Dr. Jude Caravan, the author of the book, The Cosmic Hologram, who will be taking us into this wonderful journey, as you already did with us, Jeremy, today. So with that, I'm handing over back to Joshua to formally thank you, Joshua.
Very good. Just to say, I think we've all truly enjoyed your presentation, Jeremy. Thank you so much for walking your talk and your generosity. Certainly, I have experienced something more than I've experienced in other presentations online. And I shall certainly be following up the deep transformation work for myself, and I encourage others to do so. So thank you again, Jeremy. Thank you, everybody. Do keep connected. This is really important work, really important connections. Thank you again.
Thank you. Okay.